problem is, I think he's now legitimized a nuclear threat as a mechanism, as a negotiation tactic. Now, obviously, a nuclear threat looms behind all negotiations with nuclear powers, but the prohibition, the stigma that would come from using a nuclear weapon in the modern context is so great that most of the nuclear players just simply don't use them even when they're at war. That's been the history since we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the aftermath, nuclear powers have often been at war and not used their nuclear weapons. So I think that this was a dangerous kind of brinksmanship. I think it exists in a context that is most unfortunate. And I'll point out what that context is here in a second. But at the very least, I believe that he normalized the threat of the use of nuclear weapons. And I would point out to anybody who says, yeah, that's what he does. The problem is the threat has to have a degree of credibility to have any point in issuing it at all. So this is not the equivalent of when Ronald Reagan joked into a hot mic, whether it was intentional or not, and there's some debate historically, but he joked into a hot mic that the Soviet Union was going to be destroyed. The bombing starts in 5 minutes, right? It was a joke. Still, it caused a lot of consternation amongst everybody, really. But this is not that. This is a country at war threatening nuclear annihilation by implication. And even if it can be argued to have been successful, it still puts the world in greater danger than it was before such a thing had been normalized. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the unfortunate context. This is where the game theory comes in. What happened in the aftermath of Iran, I don't even want to say they blinked, because although they blinked, what they delivered that the president was then forced to accept was a fair basis for a beginning of a discussion was a radical defeat for American policy. So the Iranians put out a list of things that they required, and the president said that's acceptable as a starting point. And the point is, what the Iranians were asking for showed great strength. For the president not to laugh at it showed strength on their part. So, but here's the problem. You had the basic property in play is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran holds the world hostage by having control over that strait and refusing to open it up as long as they're under attack, understandably. The proposal, both proposals involve the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. In the Iranian proposal, the Strait of Hormuz and a substantial fee for crossing it, $2 million a ship, would be used in lieu of the reparations they initially asked for from the United States. So the idea is, well, we can
indefinitely. The fee for crossing with a ship.
I think so. Now, I will say, back when I was a graduate student living in the Panama Canal, huge fees for ships to pass through these waterways are standard. And
sure, is the Strait of Hormuz similarly infrastructure rich?
No.
Panama Canal, it requires a ton of money to maintain and operate.
100%. But you will also notice the strange nature of Panama City sitting on the shores of the canal, which is the modern metropolis that it is because of
the riches that flow in.
Right. So,
although also, yes.
But anyway, point is, no, the Strait of Hormuz is different than the Panama Canal. But the idea that, I mean, look, effectively what we've got is a breakdown in the rules of peaceful order and warlordism, right? You've effectively got a warlord sitting on the shores of the strait in a position to extract resources or shut down world commerce. So that's an interesting puzzle piece, completely foreseeable in the attacking of Iran. But the other thing, the other game theoretic piece that has to be understood is, and I don't think any of us have the information to understand it in any detail, but the relationship between the United States and Israel. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Israel does not want peace, that it has objectives here, and that to the extent that the US and the Iranians are trying to work out a deal in which Iran stops getting pummeled and the world economy is released from its hostage status, Israel has other plans. So, and it has leverage. So one of the things that Iran specifically named in its requirements was a cessation of attacks, including on Lebanon. Now, what do you think happened? Well, of course, Israel continues to bomb southern Lebanon and Beirut. So anyway, we have a tweet that shows this. Yeah, Glenn Greenwald. So Glenn Greenwald says the number of these casualties in Lebanon will increase significantly, but even if this casualty number were the final toll, and again, it will increase a lot, this would be equivalent of 6 9/11 attacks for a country of Lebanon's size. Now, if that comparison strikes you as at all unfair, realize this is a comparison that the Israelis regularly make about the attack on October 7th, right?
They compare it to 9/11 with regard to toll.
They correct, yeah, they correct for their population size. So if you scroll down, you can see images of bombing in Lebanon, and there's just tremendous devastation. So how this will affect they're not even negotiations yet, but the negotiations that seem to be threatening to occur if Israel has the capacity to scuttle them by acting in a provocative way. There was, I don't think I sent it to you, Jen, but there was a statement by Benjamin Netanyahu in which he effectively says, we have objectives, they're not done, our finger is on the trigger, uses very provocative language. And anyway, my basic point is this. The fate of the world arguably hangs in the balance here. The interaction between a war with Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, and the world economy it really couldn't be more dangerous. The number of, famine hangs in the balance. The ability to get fertilizer, some large percentage of the world's fertilizer passes through the Straits of Hormuz. Obviously, there's the issue of crude oil. You've got some more subtle issues with things like helium, which is a major player in sophisticated technology. All of these things are connected together in a complex system in which we appear to have intervened with simplistic ideas of what might be accomplished and in what way. And we now have the question in which we cannot observe what is going on. It is interesting that the United States called off its attack on Iran based on signaling from Iran. Presumably behind the scenes, Israel did not want the United States to call off its attack, whatever that attack was. And the U.S. decided to do it anyway. And so the question is, what is that negotiation like? And are we in a position to make peace with Iran if Israel decides it does not want that peace made? And if so, what can we do about that? Surely we have the right to stop a war that we initiated, but our complex partnerships let's put it this way, it's easier to scuttle peace than it is to make it, right? And this is a basic principle.
Which is one of the reasons that keeping the peace should be an imperative, as opposed to imagining that you can return to peace having broken it.
Exactly. And more on that another day, because I think there's a hidden story here that is very clarifying. So I will return to that another day. But the idea of when you have order, and actually this fits so well with what you're going to talk about, because those who are threatening our admittedly deeply flawed system domestically are playing,
our political system.
Yes, our political system are playing with fire that they appear not to understand. In other words, they are threatening to break a flawed system rather than fix it, not knowing what it is that will replace it. And the point is, warlordism is not a bad model. In fact, it's one of several terrible failure modes that will happen if you take something functional, as the modern West is. It's not in good shape, but it's functional. And if you take it and break it, what you're going to get is going to be unthinkably bad.